Today's daf is daf Chaf Tes 29, and we're starting from the Mishnah on daf Chaf Ches Amud Sheni Kol Shiva Sayamim. I want to point out something from yesterday. From yesterday. We learned yesterday that there was a big Tana called Yonasan ben Oziel. You remember yesterday that he was one of the greatest student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zak of Hillel HaZaken. Yonasan ben Oziel. I'm pointing it out on the screen here, and that whenever he would sit and learn Torah, a bird that would fly over him would right away be burnt, because when a bird flying over his head would right away be burnt. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but in Israel, his burial site is very, very, very popular. It's called Amuka, and I don't know what the source is, but the reason why it's popular is that people go to his burial site it's located in a valley. It's hard to get there, but it's a segula for shidduchim. If you're looking for a partner, a life's partner, you go there to his kever. It works. That's what they say. I think the reason is because in order to get there, you have to step down go very deep, and that's a sign that if you want to really get married, you have to go down a little bit, and then you could humble yourself a little bit, and then you get a partner. And
it's
also,
very steep.
What?
It's very steep to get down there.
Very steep to get. I remember I went there with camp Stay Chemed, and it's very, very steep. So so it's a good simon that it's a good schooler to get married. You just got to go bend a little bit, and you'll get married. Also, I was thinking that it's possible that the way to get married, because a lot of these people who hold off getting married, is because they have chalomis a little bit. There are birds flying around their heads of the way life is supposed to be, the way their partner is supposed to be. And one of the character traits of Rabbi Yonasan ben Oziel was that any bird that flew over his head was right away burnt. So if you start burning all those birds that's flying in your head, then it's a segula for getting married. So I'm just saying it b'derech melitza. Okay.
Yosef ben Oziel, correct?
What?
Yosef ben Oziel, that's his name?
Yonasan ben Oziel. It's Amuka. Just type in Amuka, and you'll see all the Jewish websites. Donate here. We'll get somebody to go to his kever for you.
Okay.
So
I don't have to wait until they open up Israel then.
Yeah. No, they'll go for you even without it. Yeah. If you want to go there, it's an interesting place. Okay. All right. So we're beginning the Mishnah on Daf Chaf Ches Amud Sheni. The Mishnah says, Kol Shiva Sayamim, all 7 days, Adam Oises Ukase Keva Ubeisai Arai. A person's supposed to make his sukkah the most permanent place where he's living, and his house should be like a place of storage, or place of that you do things for to prepare for the sukkah. That's the house. It's temporary. Now the Mishnah says, Yordu Geshaman. Let's say it starts to rain in your sukkah. When are you permitted to vacate the sukkah? So the Mishnah answers that if you were eating a bowl of porridge, like a farina, right? So mishatisrach hamikva, when that farina would become unedible to eat, or it would become spoiled, difficult to eat, then you're allowed to leave the sukkah. So mashlu, they give a mashal, a parable. What is this compared to when Hashem makes it rain in your sukkah on sukkahs? It's le'eved shebal limzay kais l'rabbi. A mass servant wants to pour a cup for his master, and the master spills the water on his face. In other words, they used to have, like you have coffee, right? And the waiter brings it, the hot coffee with the milk. And then if it's a good restaurant, he'll actually pour the milk into your coffee. Well, they used to have wine that was very, very strong, and they had to dilute it. So if a servant was bringing the undiluted wine to his master, plus a pitcher of water to pour into the as a service for the master to pour into his cup to make the wine drinkable, and instead of pouring it into his the shafach loy, somebody spilled it on the floor in front of the master. So what does this mean? It could mean one of two things. If the master, spilled the water on the floor and said, it's almost like the master saying to the servant, get out. I don't want you to help me. Leave now. Or it could also mean it's like the servant pouring it by mistake onto the floor. And therefore it's a lesson for him to up his game to try to serve his master better. So God's making it rain, obviously, but what is the symbol for? We'll learn more about that in the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanim. I just want to point out to you and it's a very important point. When it rains in the sukkah, technically speaking, a person could hold open an umbrella and stay in the sukkah, right? Why not? It's not 10 tefachim. It's not like we learned that if you sleep under a bed, it has to be a distance of 10 tefachim, and then you have a problem. Sukkah underneath a sukkah. But an umbrella should technically be not a problem of staying in a sukkah. But the idea is that when Hashem makes it rain, and you're uncomfortable being in a sukkah, standing there with an umbrella, it's sort of Hashem is telling you, get out. I don't want you to be strict over here and stay in the sukkah with the umbrella. Well, let's learn the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanan. Kol shiva siyamim, all 7 days. Odamaisu sukkah keva ubeisa erai. Person makes his sukkah permanent and his house temporary. Ketzad. Hoyloi kelim noim. If he has fancy dishes, ma'alon l'sukkah. You bring it up to the sukkah. We saw this before that the sukkahs in Israel were on top of the roof, so you bring it up to your sukkah. Matzois nois. If you have good bed sheets, ma'alon l'sukkah. You bring that up to the sukkah. Oichel v'shoisa, you eat and drink, umetayel b'sukkah, and you take a walk in the sukkah. In other words, if you want to play cards, you want to have a conversation with somebody, you do it in the sukkah, because your sukkah is now your home. So the Gemara says, "Mino halimini." How do I know that you have to do all that in the sukkah? The Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, "Teishvu ke'ein taduro." That what? The pasuk says, "Basukkah's teishvu." You're supposed to live in the sukkah. And you live in the sukkah the way you live in your home. Now, I want to point out to you that the word teshru does not mean sit, even though shev always means sit generally. Teshru could also mean you settle in, you stay there, like you see in this week's parsha. I guess I'm gonna just throw it out there. Would anybody know where in this week's parsha you see the word yeshiva means to stay? I'll tell you right now, because the pasuk says v'yurishtem ba, what? Bishaftem
ba.
Oh,
Vishaftem.
Alan, you would get it. V'yurishtem ayisa v'shaftem ba, which doesn't mean sit. We're going to sit in Israel. We're going to stay in Israel. So teishru means we're supposed to stay and live in the sukkah, just like you live in a house. Mekan amru, from Chazal, deduced from here, kol shiva suyamin ayisa adam sukkah keva ubeisei rai ketzad. How should you live in a sukkah? If you fancy dishes, mal in the sukkah. Matzois nois, fancy bed sheets, and you're sleeping in the sukkah, mal in the sukkah. You bring it up to the sukkah. Oichel v'shoysu matayel b'sukkah. You eat and drink, and you walk around the sukkah. And now the Mishnah Gemara says, shanein b'sukkah. You should learn in a sukkah. Now the Gemara understands learning in a sukkah means you're learning bi'iyun, means you're really in depth in what you're learning. So are you really supposed to learn Torah in a sukkah? Aini, but it's not so. Va'ama Rava said, if you're learning Mikra, which means Chumash or Tanakh, Umisna, you're learning Mishnayos, then you do it in the sukkah. But if you're learning like Gemara, trying to learn in depth and understanding the reasoning behind the Mishnayos, which requires intense learning, bar mitaltalta, you should learn it outside the sukkah, because in the sukkah it's hard to concentrate. You're outdoors, and sometimes the weather is not perfect. So how are you going to learn? You're better off learning inside. So how do you tell me that the Brisa says you're supposed to learn in the sukkah, and Rava says you should learn outside the sukkah? So the Gemara says loy kasha, that's not difficult. Ha b'migras. If you're learning for the first time, if you're learning it like to get it, like what we're learning right now, that you do learn in a sukkah. Ha b'iyunai. But when you need intense concentration to understand the logic behind the Gemara, and the Taisvasin and the Rishonim and the Lamdas, that you should learn outside the sukkah, because there you need total concentration. And now the Gemara tells you how are you supposed to learn Torah? How are you supposed to accomplish Torah? The Rabba Bar Chama, Rabba Bar Chama learned by Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda is the rabbi, and Rabba Bar Chama is the student. So first, Mirahate B'Gemara, they would rush through the Gemara and learn it Bahade Adadi. So they would learn the Gemara back and forth, so they got it straight. V'Hadar Ma'ayne Biswar, and then they would go back and do it more deeply and get into the logic behind the Gemara. And that's the way it really supposed to be done. Unfortunately, some of the yeshivas, they right away start the boys to learn very, very, very slowly and very deeply, when they don't see the big picture. And here you see that's not the approach of the Gemara. Amar Rava said, Mani mishtei b'metalte, the glassware that you drink from, you could leave that in the sukkah. Even after you let's say you had a cup of coffee, you could leave the mug in a sukkah. Mani mechle, but the plates, after you finish eating, bar mitalalta, take that out of the sukkah. Have the plates with your chicken bones on it. It's not respectful. So as soon as you finish eating, remove them from the sukkah. Chatzva, a jug of a shachil or a pitcher made of wood, but generally bar mitalalta, take that outside the sukkah, because their jugs and their pitchers are not like like ours. They looked ugly, and they may have had a smell to it, so that's not supposed to be brought in the sukkah. Ushraga, a lamp, b'metalalta, you bring that into the sukkah. V'amrila, and others say, a lamp, like a candelabra, bar mitalalta, should be outside the sukkah. V'loy pligi, it's no argument. When do you bring a candelabra in the sukkah? Ha b'sukkah gedola. In a large sukkah, then you can bring a candelabra in the sukkah, because you don't have a problem there. You're nervous that it's going to catch fire. So therefore, that could be in a sukkah. But b'sukkah ketana, in a small sukkah, which is just the right size, if you bring a lamp in there, people are not going to stay in the sukkah. They're going to try to leave because they're afraid that the place is going to catch fire. There, it should be outside the sukkah. I will tell you that some people have the stringency not to bring a pot into the sukkah, like a pot that you cook with, because the sukkah is not a kitchen. The sukkah is a dining room / bedroom, basically. And just like in the dining room, when as soon as you finish eating, you clear the table. So that's the way it should be in the sukkah. Yordu geshamin, if the rain comes down. Tana, we learned in the Brisa, mishetisrach hamikva shel grisen, that when the porridge, this loose but thick food, can become soiled or spoiled, and grisen is the type of beans. That's the shear. It's not so it's like it's a shear that gets something that gets spoiled rather quickly. So therefore, it doesn't take a lot of rain for you to be permitted to vacate your sukkah. Obviously, we're not talking about the first night. I mean, the first night, a person is supposed to try to eat in the sukkah no matter what. But on a typical night, if it starts raining a little bit, then you could already vacate the sukkah. Now the Gemara says an interesting story. Abaya, Havaki Yosef Kamed Rav Yosef b'metalalta. Abaya was sitting in Rav Yosef's sukkah. Neshav Zika, a wind blew, v'komaisi tzivuse, and other things from the schach, like loose wood from the schach, started to fall down into the sukkah. And therefore, Amalu Rav Yosef says, let's move our plates, and let's going back into the house. So it wasn't raining, it's just the wind blew, and then some things from the schach started to fall into the sukkah. Abaya said, Vatanan mishatisrach hamikpa. You have to wait till the food gets spoiled by water, by rain. And why are we leaving the sukkah now, just for a little wind? So Rav Yosef says, Lididi, to me, Kaven da aninen datai. I'm very, very particular or finicky. So just a slight discomfort is like the food getting spoiled. In other words, Rabbi Yosef he was so particular that when things were not right, he felt very uncomfortable. He was mitzdayer. Rashi points out on the side right away that Rashi says a very interesting thing from Gemara and Pesachim that we learned. There are people who are alive, but they're not really living. If you have these kind of phobias, then your life is very, very difficult. Harachmonim, if someone is overly merciful on people, that's also terrible. Varaschonin, or somebody who's overly angry. Anine hadas, and somebody who's overly particular. Because if you're overly particular, it's inevitable that you're going to feel uncomfortable in many, many situations. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, and rain came down to Yorad. And he left the sukkah. Yorad means he would go down from the roof to his house, right? So he was eating and he continued supper. The key word is that he continued his supper in his house. Let's say in the middle of your supper, it stopped raining. We don't bother him to go back up to the sukkah until he finishes the meal. So he can finish the rest of the meal outside the sukkah. You don't have to go. If a person was sleeping tachas the sukkah, underneath the sukkah, and it rained, the yarad, and then he went down into his house. We don't require him to go back up to the sukkah if it stopped raining in the middle of the night, or until the light comes, until it gets light outside. You could talk up. Let's see.
Yes, can I ask a question? You
Yeah,
said
sure.
that
Always.
it's a bad thing. Thank you. It's a bad thing if you're overly merciful. Why is that?
Too liberal, it becomes you could, first of all, I mean, here's the quote: a person could spoil his children. If you too much rachmanis on your child and you give him, you may end up feeding him drugs. I mean, you're paying for everything because you have rachmanis on him, and some people have that nature that they destroyed their families that way. Or they destroyed the gifts that they were given because they had too much of a heart and gave away their wealth.
Right.
You can see how overly sympathetic is not a good thing. And some
I think the Rambam, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but I think the Rambam or the Ramban, I'm not sure, one of the things I was reading, or that you should basically live your life. Not everybody could be a tzaddik more like Moshe Rabbeinu. And of course, no, he doesn't want anybody to be to Russia, but the best way to live your life, I think he quotes somewhere in one of the Sepharim, is to be down the middle.
right
Don't be too charitable.
extremes.
Be charitable. And no extremism. Be down the middle.
Right.
You said
Right.
that parents that would be too generous would even give drugs to their children.
That's Rachmanin. That's Rachmanin.
In
What the Gemara, I think, is talking about is somebody by nature has that thing inside of them, that he's too particular. He has to work on himself not to show too much Rachmanis, not to get angry very quickly. So there are people who are prone to that. They have to know themselves to balance themselves, as Sheldon said, to the middle. And that takes a lot of hard work. You see, Rav Yosef we wouldn't paskin like Rav Yosef if as soon as a little something from the schach falls down, you're leaving the sukkah already. I mean, it was extreme. Rabbi found it extreme. Why is he leaving the sukkah? He found something from the schach that fell to the floor. So, okay. So the Mishnah Brisa continues. If a person was sleeping and the rain came down, and he left the sukkah, he doesn't have to go back to the sukkah until it becomes light outside. Or until he wakes up with an ayin, or until it becomes light outside. So in other words, let's say he wakes up in the middle of the night and it's not raining anymore. Is he required to go back to the sukkah or not? He left the sukkah at 10 o'clock at night, and now he wakes up at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's still dark outside. Does he have to return to the sukkah because he woke up? Or ye'or means that it actually turned light. Tashma, come in here. it became light. The Brisa says it became light, sunrise happened, and it's dawn. What does that mean? Tarte, how do you explain this Brisa? Ella Ema, the Brisa means to say you need two conditions, or until you wake up, and it has to be Viyala Amud Hashacha, or it was dawn already. In other words, if in the middle of the night, if you wake up in the middle of the night, you do not have to return to the sukkah. And not only that, if you're sleeping through the night and it's not raining outside and it's past dawn, right? We don't tell your family, go wake him up and go back into the sukkah. We let him sleep the night in the house until he wakes up. So you need two conditions to go back to the sukkah. If you left the sukkah because of rain, one, and the rain stopped. One, it has to be after Abud HaShachar, and two, you have to wake up. The Gemara asked the question, Mi shafach lemi, who's spilling on who? In other words, is it the master spilling the water on the servant and telling him, get out of here? And which that basically means that if it rains, you should not push yourself to stay in a sukkah. That's contrary to what Hashem wants. Hashem doesn't want you there. Go out. Or is the example as the so to speak, that the servant messed up and spilled the water on the floor? So which means that he should push himself to serve his master more correctly. And therefore, what that would mean that when it rains, the person should try to push himself to even stay in the sukkah if it's possible, maybe with an umbrella. Tashma, the Tanya we learned in the Brisa, shafach loy rabbi kitan al panav. The mashal is that the master threw the jug of water on the floor in front of the servant, like he's staying v'amaloi, and he told him, I don't want you to serve me. So that means when it rains, you should. It's not a good sign. It's a siman klala, and you have to leave the sukkah. Now we're talking about siman klalas, bad signs. Tanu Rabban and the rabbis taught bisman, during the time shahachamo loika, that there's an eclipse. Now, during ancient times, when there was an eclipse, it was always considered like a bad sign that God is angry, and it can be very, very scary. I don't know if we experienced it ever. And I think in the 70s they had it in New York, but when all of a sudden, middle of the day, it turns dark in a very, very intense darkness when the moon blocks out the sun. So during the time that happens, siman ra l'chol ha'olam kuloi. That's a bad omen for the entire world. That God is very angry with the world. It's a time of judgment, and something bad is going to happen. Mashal l'mo hadav adoima. Let's compare it. L'melech basav adam. There was a king. Shasa suda la'avodav. He made a suda for his servant. V'niach panas lifneim, and he put like a lamp in front of them, which is a reference to the sun. Then he got angry at his servants. Then he told his slave, "Tul panas b'pneim v'ashim v'mechayishav." Take the lamp from them and put them in darkness. And that's basically what Hashem is doing. He's telling the moon to line up with the sun and darken the world. Now, it's predictable that it's going to happen. So, but the Gemara interprets it as a bad sign to the world, because it's bisman, that the zman somehow major dinim coming on, major judgments on the world. Tanya, we learned to the Brisa. Rameir said, "Kol zman shema oiris loikin." Whenever the luminaries in the sky are eclipsed, sliman ra. This is a bad sign. L'sein aim shel Yisrael, to the Jewish people. It's like a euphemism. It's always going to be bad for the Jewish people, because Hashem always wants to correct the Jewish people, because He expects more from us. And whenever bad things is happening to the world, the Jewish people are trained to get whacked, so to speak, and therefore it's a bad sign mostly for Jews. Marshall, this is a good example. The Seifa, let's say a principal of a school, or a teacher, an old-time teacher that you had in Cheder, Shabola Beisa Seifa, comes to the school, Urutsua biyadai, and he has the shtekela, the whip in his hand, right? Midayeg, which of the students are going to be the most nervous? The one that gets whacked every day, who daig, he's nervous because the Rebbe is coming there to give him patch. because he must have done something wrong. So what he's saying is that when we see an eclipse, it's a bad sign for Jewish people to take it more seriously. Tana Rabbanim, Bisman, during that period, Shachama Loika, that the sun is eclipsed. Now, I don't know what this means exactly, because there's partial eclipses also that are experienced much more often. I think the next eclipse that will be visible to us would be in 2045, but we have a very often partial eclipses. Anyway, if the sun is eclipsed, Simira Goyim, it's a bad sign for the Goyim. Levana, but when the moon is eclipsed, Simira Sunaim Shal Yisrael, it's bad for the Jewish people. Because Yisrael Minor Levana, Jewish people always count the calendar to the moon. So the moon represents the Jewish people. The Goyim Lechama, but the nations of the world, they care for the sun. Therefore, when a solar eclipse happens, that's a bad sign for the Goyim. Loike b'mizrach, if the eclipse happens early in the morning, Simira Yoshvei Mizrach, it's a bad sign for those that are in the east, because the moon rises in the east. It's a bad sign if you live on the eastern part of the planet. B'marav, if it comes in the afternoon and towards the west, when the sun is in the west, that's when the eclipse happens. Simirav Yashimarav, it's a bad sign for those that are dwelling in the western side of the planet. Be'emtzaraki, if it's the middle of the sky, Simira l'chol ha'olam kulay, then it's a bad sign for the entire planet Earth. Panav daim of the dam. If you can see the sun through the moon. Maybe you can see the ring around it. And if it looks reddish, there's going to be swords, big wars coming to the world. I would wonder if there was an eclipse before any of the World War I or World War II. Lasak, if the Gemara says that if you see it like black, like a sack, then you should know that the daggers of starvation are coming to the world. Lezuv, if it looks black and looks reddish, there's going to be great wars and great hunger coming to the world. Then the Gemara says, if you see if it's right away in the morning, that if you see that it happens right before sunset, then you have the eclipse as the sun is settling. Then the bad thing that's going to happen, it's going to take time. It may take a couple of years, but you have time. But if you see the eclipse happen right in the morning as sunrise, then then you should know that the bad thing, the bad omen, is going to happen right away. It's coming quickly. Some say it's the opposite, because if you see it when it rises right away, so then you can say it's going to take time till it comes, because the truth is that the rest of the day the sun will be in a good position. So it's just in the morning that you had it, but it's a sign the opposite, that the bad omen is not going to happen right away. But if you see it when the sun is setting, then it could be that just like this, when the sun sets, it comes right away dark. You can say the bad omen is going to happen right away. So there are two ways to look at it. When the eclipse happens in the morning or in the night, in the afternoon, doesn't mean that the bad things are going to happen right away, or it's going to take time till it comes. And since we're talking about the sun being eclipsed, every nation in the world doesn't get whacked until, if their God, so to speak, the malach, that's the talisman over that nation, gets whacked in heaven. Hashem says, before I'm going to take you out of Mitzrayim, all the gods and the idols of Mitzrayim I will punish. So to speak, God punished all the angels that protected the Mitzrayim before he did the final solution of taking us out of Mitzrayim. So we see that before a nation gets destroyed, Hashem destroys the malach in heaven first. Ubizman, and the Gemara concludes, Ubizman she Yisrael when the Jews are doing the will of God, Ein misyared mikol eila, they have no reason to fear. Shenema, Koyam Hashem el derech hagoyim al tilamadu, u'moises hashmayim al techatu, ki echatu hagoyim mehema. Don't be afraid of the signs of heaven, because the goyim are afraid of them. Goyim echatu, the nations of the world are afraid of these signs. The Jewish people don't have to be afraid of that, but as long as they're doing the will of Hashem, the will of Hashem is not necessarily just doing mitzvahs, but also doing mitzvahs and being proud and doing it with an understanding of why you're doing the mitzvahs. That is the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, there are 4 reasons why God brings an eclipse on the world. What's the 4 reasons? If the chief justice of the Jewish people dies, he must have been a great man, and no one gives him a eulogy the way kahalacha, the way he deserves. So they just ignore his death and they put him away. So that's the reason why God would bring a solar eclipse. Strange. An engaged girl, right? She's engaged to get married, but not yet married, and that somebody raped her, and she's screaming in the city, and nobody is there to help her. So that kind of crime, that went unpunished, or no one helped her, that brings a lunar eclipse. As an aside, I grew up in Kew Gardens. In Kew Gardens, there was, in the 60s, there was a famous murder there, the Genovese murder. I don't remember it was around the corner where I lived. 38 people watched this lady get stabbed, and nobody did anything. Nobody wanted to help her. It was a major case that rocked the world.
But they said that it's not that they didn't want to help her. They thought that it was a couple that just had an argument, like had happened many times before,
right,
in the neighborhood, and they also assumed that other people called. So it's not that they didn't care, but you never know.
Right, it was the bystander thing. But again, nobody's helping her. That's why God brings bad things to the world. Bal Mishkav Zakar, of homosexuality, God brings the solar eclipse. Bal Shnei Achim, because of 2 brothers, that were killed at one time, that's also a reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings this solar eclipse. It's not clear how, Rashi says, B'shvil dal from lo shmati tam davar. Rashi tells you, I don't understand the connection between a solar eclipse and what the Gemara just said. And because of 4 things, the luminaries of the sky are eclipsed. Al koisve plaster, people who write false documents, in order to, you falsify a check or something like that. Valmiide edus sheker, people who say false testimony against somebody to cause them a loss of money. Valmegadle behema daka beretz Yisrael, you raise thin animals in Israel, which, there was a gzera not to raise certain animals in Israel because those animals tend to go eat on other people's property, and leads to Geneva and Gazela. People who cut down good trees for nothing, right? So there, cutting down a tree brings a bad omen into the world. There is a side thing in Williamsburg, I know where it is, that a guy was put up an apartment building, and he cut down a fruit tree prior to putting up the building. And the young couples moved in there, and for some reason, nobody could explain why, but many of the young couples were childless for many years. And then it came out that he cut down the tree. So one by one, all these people left, and it's like a Puerto Rican building in the middle of Williamsburg. Simply the Jews, the Hasidic community don't want to live in that building. Anyway, kaitz say Ilonais Tavis. Ubishmil dal dvaram, new thing. There are 4 reasons why nichse balei batim, the possessions of very rich people, nimsar lamalchus, are given over to taxes. In Gemara language, the word balei batim means 2 things. It's a pejorative term. It means somebody who is very rich, but also somebody who has a certain arrogance to them. Balei batim means he thinks he owns his own house. That's where it comes from. So the Gemara says they lose their money to the government. The government takes it away, high taxes, and gives it to, and spreads the wealth. What is that? Amashe shtaris peruyim. Rashi says if you leave, you lend somebody money, he paid you back, and you hold on to the document. You're supposed to tear it up, and you hold on to it. That could potentially lead that you're going to recollect again you're going to recollect the debt again. You're supposed to rip it up. So whoever keeps documents, debt instruments that are supposed to be ripped up, that is the reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu will cause his wealth to be given over to taxes. Someone who is a money lender with high interest rates, okay? Hard money loans. It's not a good way to make money. And then the Gemara says, we go to Chavtes Amud Sheni, Val Shahoya Sipik Biyodam Lemachos V'Loimichu. That's an unbelievable thing. The rich people have an opportunity to protest certain things that are not right in the community because they're rich and people would listen to them. And they don't protest. They just mind their own business. They don't get involved. Well, because of that, God says not using your money properly. You're supposed to use your money and give musar where and try to make corrections on the tzibur, because people will listen to you. If you had that opportunity to protest and you don't protest, God takes away the money. And there was people that make big pledges in public, and they don't follow through. They claim that they only meant to encourage others to give. Again, if people assume that you made this pledge, you got to follow through. Amar Rav said, Bishvil arbor dvarim, because of another four things, nichsei balibatim yotzin l'timyon. The possessions of rich people get lost. They get lost by themselves on nonsense. What does it mean? If someone withholds, let's say, payment, somebody's working for you, and you owe him money, but you could pay him, but you push him off and say, I'm going to pay you later. You keep the bill outstanding more than net 30. So the guy's waiting for his money and you're not picking up the call, even though you could potentially pay him. You have the means to pay him. And then there's another part, someone who withholds payment for somebody who did, let's say somebody was the broker and you're not paying the commission. You say, I knew about it, or prove it to me. I don't, where's your document that I owe you this money? So you hold back from paying. So God says, that you're getting your money illegally. Well, I'm going to make sure that you're not going to enjoy it. And if they shirk responsibilities and put it on somebody else, they always delegating responsibility and not taking on responsibility. Again, this is all a matter of arrogance, and that's what the Gemara says. Valgasas aruach, having a bloated ego, is a reason to lose your money. The gasas aruach, having a bloated ego and arrogance, keneged kulam, that's worth more than everything. Then but if you're humble, and the word humble means that you're humble in two ways. When you say somebody is humble, it means that they have two qualities. One, that when they look to God, they always recognize that God is giving them more than they deserve. That's called humbleness, bein adam lamokan, between man and God. And novin, being humble between man and man, which means when you look at somebody else, you don't consider yourself, just because you have more wealth and possessions than he does, you're superior. Obviously, maybe that person accomplished more and is worth more by Hashem because he's fulfilling his potential more so than you are. So you have to be humble when you deal with God, and you deal with Hashem. So those that are humble, they don't have to worry about their wealth. Ksiv ba'novim yishu aretz. The humble people will inherit the land. Bis angul, they will enjoy al roiv shalom, on the abundance of peace. And peace always can also refers to a good self-esteem. Loi shame. A person who has good self-esteem knows that he has a name, a mission in the world, and that he's a part of a chelik Elokai Mimal. So Hadron Allah Hayashim, we finished the third Baruch Hashem, the second parak, and that's it.
Shkoyach, beautiful.
Thank you.
A quick question before,
Yeah.
a few minutes ago, you said a person that falsifies a check. What happens then? What is that a sign of? I didn't want to.
So he gets this. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings falsifies that. So here,
Not the eclipse.
right,
no,
right,
no.
right. God brings it again. God brings about koisve plaster. The luminaries. There's eclipse in the luminaries. Al koisve plaster. He like falsifies checks, or falsifies documents. Rashi says stories muzuyafim, documents that are false. Mikisve almol, a guy forges it. Losum doifi alovim lichtayv bishmai, to write in his name mashaloi tziva, what he didn't command. So he falsifies a check, falsifies documents. Why does that have to do with the God bringing about eclipse, which is a bad sign? So Rashi says, Loi shamati tam dover. I have no idea how you connect the two. And why God brings like a lunar eclipse, or some of the planets are eclipse, because of this person writing false documents, is Rashi wasn't clear. Other
All
You said-
your
you said-
examples happen all the time, and there aren't always eclipses. So
Yeah, you said a lunar eclipse is bad for the Yidden, a sun eclipse is bad for the Goyim.
Rab Meir said that, right here.
Right. And then you said that there's a certain eclipse that is bad for the world in general, which is what?
If the eclipse happens in the middle of the sky, if it happens in midday, a solar eclipse in the middle of the day, in the middle of the sky, is a bad sign.
For the world in general.
It's hard to. This Gemara is very difficult because this is science. We can predict with certainty to the
Right.
second where the eclipse is going to
to
happen.
the absolute second, and where in the world it will be seen and everything.
Right.
Right, but that eclipse that you refer to is bad for the world in general, not just for Goyim or Yidden, but for everyone, you said.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah. But in ancient times, imagine that I think
yeah.
They
wars
were
were
scared.
stopped. If I remember from high school, wars were stopped in the middle of the war. An eclipse happened, and everybody said, "We're going home." God doesn't want this war. Imagine ancient times, you had no idea what's going on, and all of a sudden it gets super
Right.
glued. It's something to look into. But the Gemara, that's why the Gemara says bisman, during those periods.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah,
Thank you.
fascinating Gemara.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos,
Have a good Shabbos.
Shabbos, we pick it up on
Thank you.
Sunday.
Thank you very much, Baruch. Sei gesund.
I still gonna get you the copy of that.
Oh, don't worry about it.
I
Whenever
know where it is. I just have to pull it off the shelf.
No. You have better things to do, I'm sure.
No, I'll get it.
Enjoy the Shabbos. My best. Thank you.
Shabbos, man.
Sei gesund. Take care.
Is it?